You're listening to Inge Reads, the Marshal's Handbook July 2020 edition. This is our final section for the handbook, as it is the glossary of the handbook, which in this edition begins on page 47. Again, my name is Ingegerd. If you have any questions regarding the rules, please check with your kingdom, as every kingdom can have slightly different rules in addition to society-wide rules, which this handbook covers. And also, please check your most recent edition of your handbook in case this recording becomes out of date and somehow is found. And if still in doubt, please check with your local marshal for any rules, policies, or guidelines. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, or complaints regarding this recording itself, please talk to me. My name is Ingegerd, and I hail from the Kingdom of Atlantia. All right, so page 27, Roman numeral 21, glossary. The definitions that follow apply throughout the handbook unless specifically stated otherwise. They are intended to clarify usage and establish a frame of reference for the various materials used in SCA combat. A. Armor materials. First definition is aventail, flexible curtain of chainmail on a helmet, extending to cover the neck and shoulders. Bars. Used in the visor or faceplate of helms, bars shall be mild steel, a minimum of 3/16 of an inch or 4.5 millimeters in diameter, or the equivalent, if the distance between the crossbars is 2 inches or 50.8 millimeters or less. 1.125, that is 1/8 of an inch, or 3.2 millimeter bars may be used. Camail. Flexible curtain of mail or leather on a helm, extending to cover the neck. See also aventail. Close cell foam. Stiff foam with closed cells, less dense than resilient foam, for example, enzolite. Equivalent. Virtually identical to the specified material in effect or function, including impact resistance, impact distribution, and impact absorption characteristics, but not necessarily in physical dimensions. Foam. Any open or closed cell foam, including foam rubber, foam neoprene, polyurethane, etc. Gauge. U.S. sheet metal standard. Note that 16 gauge is officially 1/16 of an inch, or 0.0625 inch, or about 1.6 millimeters. But commercially available sheet is frequently rolled to 0.058 or even 0.055 inch, much too thin for helms. Gauntlet. An armored glove covering the back of the hand, fingers, and thumb, and the points and back of the wrist. Gorget. A piece of armor designed to cover the throat and neck. Heavy leather. Stiff, oak-tanned leather, nominally 11/64 of an inch, or 0.171875 inch, or 4.4 millimeters thick. This is referred to as 11-ounce leather. Mail. Any fabric of small metal components either linked together, for example, chain, or attached to a flexible backing, for example, ring or scale. Padding. Quilted or multi-layered cloth materials such as mattress pads, moving pads, carpet, felt, or equivalent. Partial gauntlet, also called a half gauntlet or demi-gauntlet. An armored glove covering the back of the hand and at least the first knuckle of the thumb, as well as the points and back of the wrist. Plate. Large components of rigid material. Resilient foam. Dense, plastic, closed-cell foam, such as ethyl polymer. Rigid material. A. Steel of no less than 18 gauge, or aluminum of no less than 0.075 inch, or 1.9 millimeters. B. Other materials of sufficient thickness to give similar rigidity to those listed above, to include treated steel or aluminum. C. High impact resistant plastics such as ABS or polyethylene of sufficient thickness to give similar rigidity to those listed above. D. Heavy leather, as defined above, that has been hardened in hot wax, soaked in polyester resin, properly catalyzed, or treated in a way or such a manner as to permanently harden the leather. E. 2 layers of untreated heavy leather, as defined above. F. Other materials equivalent to those items listed above. Any armor of unusual construction or materials must meet the approval of the kingdom or principality Earl Marshal for their designated deputy. Steel. Cold or hot rolled mild steel or equivalent ferrous material. B. Weapons. Striking surface. Because of the nature of our activities and the ability of our weapons to break during use, the striking surface of a weapon is to be considered throughout the entire striking portion, blade, or head of the weapon, not only the outside skin or layer. This includes all interior construction materials and parts, no matter how deep inside. Approved rigid plastics. Siloflex and Siloflex equivalents are currently the only rigid plastic approved for the striking surface of a weapon. Bow. A projectile launcher consisting of a material held under tension by a string, also referred to as a hand bow. Crossbow. A projectile launcher consisting of a bow, called a prod, being mounted to a stock with a lock mechanism to hold the string in full draw and allow its release via a trigger. Flail. A weapon with a striking surface attached to the handle via a flexible arm or pivot. Laminated rattan. 2 pieces of rattan, each being at least 1 inch or 25.4 millimeters in diameter, attached to one another with a short overlap by tape or other method of binding. Maximum length of the overlap shall be 18 inches or 85.7 centimeters, or half of the length of the added rattan, whichever is shorter. Note that use of glues, epoxies, or adhesives which substantially reduce the flexibility of the rattan is prohibited. Missile weapon. Any weapon which is intended to deliver a blow without being held in the hand, for example, arrows, javelins, quarrels, or various soft projectiles from catapults. Pole arms. Hafted weapons, generally long, designated to be wielded with 2 hands, for example, glaives, halberds, etc. Progressively resistant give, as used in the discussion of thrusting tips. As pressure is applied directly to the thrusting surface, it will compress gradually without bottoming out or bending to the side enough to expose the end of the blade, haft, or blunt core of the weapon to which it is attached. Quillions. Crossguards of a sword. Siloflex. A brand name polyethylene tubing has been made from PE 3408 and PE 3608 but is now PE 4710 resin and conforming to ASTM D2239 standards. The material is approved for various uses throughout the rules in pressure ratings ranging from 75 psi to 200 psi. Please check the standards in the appropriate area of the rules for what is allowed. Siloflex equivalent. HDPE water service pipe materials meeting ASTM D2239 and minimum of 1 inch or 25.4 millimeters inner diameter, or ASTM D2737 and a minimum of 1.25 inch or 31.8 millimeter outer diameter, and manufactured of PE 3408, PE 3608, PE 3710, or PE 4710 resin or equivalent. Spears. Hafted weapons designed for thrusting only, also called pikes. Single-handed mass weapons, maces, axes, warhammers, or other weapons designed primarily to crush or punch holes on account of the weight of the real weapons, rather than primarily to cut on account of sharp edges on the real weapon. Maximum length for single-handed mass weapons is 48 inches or 122 centimeters. Slider. A tube or similar device that wraps around the shaft of a spear and is held in one hand, allowing the spear to slide through it. Use of sliders is prohibited. Split rattan. Rattan of at least 1.25 inches or 31.75 millimeters diameter, which has been split in two and applied to a weapon such that the striking surface of the split piece retains a cross section of 1.25 inches or 25.4 millimeters. Split rattan construction does not place the split rattan directly against the non-split haft of the weapon, but rather spaces the split off of the haft to allow give in the head by flexion of the split of rattan. Swords. Single or double-edged blade-cutting weapons, including swords with thrusting tips. Two-handed cutting or smashing weapons includes two-handed swords, great swords, bastard swords, polearms, and similar weapons. UHMW. Ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene, a wear-resistant plastic with outstanding impact strength. C. Other definitions. Armored combat. A full contact, non-choreographed recreation of medieval foot combat utilizing clothing, protective armor, and simulated weapons constructed in accordance with SCA standards, with the overall goal of recreating the appearance and methods of combat from the historical period covered by the SCA. For purposes of this definition, all combatants are held to be equipped in the same manner defined as that of approximately 1100 AD, a knee-length mail hauberk, one-piece helm with nasal, and boiled leather defenses for the lower arms and legs. Weapons and armor are constructed from approved materials as defined by the Society Marshal. Adult armored combat, as defined above, does not include light contact martial forms, such as rapier and youth combat. Adult armored combat includes all combat archery and siege weaponry used in melees or for war. Armored fighter. A combatant equipped in inspected and improved armor, who meets at least the minimum requirements for combat using rattan weapons, and who uses said rattan weapons in combat. Authorization. A procedure which determines that the individual fighter has, at minimum, read and become familiar with the rules of combat, been observed while fighting, and met any further requirements for authorization to ensure that he or she does not constitute an exceptional safety hazard, either to self or to others. Details of the procedure Used vary from kingdom to kingdom and may include further requirements. Note: the former term, qualification, is still heard but should be avoided. Battle: a single combat event in a war or wargame wherein a specific scenario is enacted. Combat archer: a combatant equipped in inspected and approved armor who meets at least the minimum requirements for combat using rattan weapons and who will be using archery equipment in combat. Rules for combat archery weapons and conventions are found in this handbook. Directed touch: a thrust that contacts the face guard of the helm, and while maintaining contact with the face guard, continues to travel in the direction of the face. Earl Marshal: the warranted chief marshal of a kingdom. Effective blow: a blow delivered with effective technique for the particular type of weapon used and struck properly oriented with sufficient force. Eric, Lisfield, Tourneyfield: the defined area for fighting, or the fighting field, usually with a roped off boundary. Fully armored: for the purposes of acknowledging blows, a fully armored fighter is presumed to be wearing a lightweight short-sleeved knee-length riveted mail hauberk over a padded gambeson with boiled leather arm and leg defenses and an open-faced iron helm with nasal. The helm may be presumed to include a very light chainmail drape permitting vision and resisting cuts by a mere touch of a bladed weapon. Also, the hands, wrists, knees, and lower legs and feet, including the areas up to 1 inch above the kneecap and 1 inch above the bend of the wrist, are not legal targets. Helpless opponent: an opponent who is unable to defend him or herself from attack for reasons beyond their control. An unarmed opponent is not necessarily helpless. Knights Marshal: the warranted chief marshal of a principality, barony, province, shire, canton, etc. Missile weapons: projectile weapons including, but not limited to, bows and arrows, crossbows and bolts, slings and stones or bullets, javelins, darts, and throwing axes. Marshal: someone who is monitoring the conduct of combat on the field. The marshal in charge of an event shall be a warranted marshal. Other individual marshals may or may not be, so long as the marshal in charge finds them competent to do the job. Rattan weapons: rattan or equivalent weapons including, but not limited to, swords of all lengths, great weapons, mass weapons, pole arms, and spears. Rostered: an appointed marshal who is listed on a roster. The roster must include the legal and society names, address, phone number, and the appointment and expiration dates for each officer. It must be signed by the appropriate royalty and the responsible superior officer, and be updated regularly. The roster must contain a statement that it is the current roster of the office for the kingdom, principality of the society as of date. Local Knights Marshal and marshals who are able to perform authorizations must be either warranted or rostered. Scenario limits: the body of rules and definitions which apply to a specific battle, such as the description of real or imaginary terrain features, obstacles, weapons limitations, allowable conduct, and scoring. Siege Engineer: a fully armored participant in armored combat who operates a siege engine. Society Marshal, Marshal of the Society, Society Marshal SEM. The warranted Chief Marshal of the Society for Creative Anachronism. War: A declared state of feigned hostility between two or more kingdoms, branches, or other recognized SCA subdivisions for the express intent of holding group combat. War maneuvers. Group combat events not involving a state of declared hostility, usually with both sides drawn from all of the kingdoms, branches, or other recognized SCA groups participating. Warranted. An appointed marshal who has been appointed by a warrant of appointment to office of the SCA Inc., signed by the appropriate royalty and the responsible superior officer. Local knight marshals, as and marshals who are able to perform authorizations must be either warranted or rostered. Youth Combat is a program designed for minors ages 6 through 17. These programs require armor, require certain weapon construction techniques and materials, train young fighters in proper etiquette, the concepts of chivalry, honor, and courtesy, teach teamwork and good sportsmanship, as well as effective fighting arts, in a definitely competitive environment that parallels adult armored combat. It employs marshals' authorizations and strict controls. The marshal is responsible for youth combat, and each kingdom is allowed to develop and run its own program. Now, this concludes our glossary on page 51. For the index, you will have to look to the video, which begins on page 52. I will slowly scroll over it, so if you would like to use it as a reference, it may take you to those pages. Again, this is for the July 2020 edition. As the handbook is updated, I will record other sections over again and upload them to this playlist, updating it, and remove previous sections. Page 53 is left intentionally blank. And this concludes the series of Inge Reads The Marshal's Handbook, July 2020. As always, if you have any questions regarding the rules, please check with your kingdom, your local marshals, and the most up-to-date handbook. If you have any questions regarding this recorded reading, you may contact me, Ingegerd. I hail from the Kingdom of Atlantia. And as always, I hope you have a good day. Stay safe.